Okay, here's one about a catastrophe that happened a little bit closer to a modern time than a lot of the things that we talk about. Kind of like when we talk about the Younger Dryas event, the comet that broke up and came across and really hit across mainly the North American continent, but also across Europe, kind of like a shotgun rather than a bullet. But there have been other times that we've gotten hit by meteors and things and stuff that's more like a bullet. Those are usually like a bullet, having a metal or a lead or really iron type composition to them where they don't break up necessarily so much. And one has to realize that when something's been in space for a long time, or any time at all really, it gets cold to the core. And whenever it starts streaking through our atmosphere and the outside starts getting a huge amount of temperature difference between the outside and the inside, it causes a weird expansion and makes a lot of them blow up. Reason I mention that is because that's what causes these air bolides, or these events where they blow up in the air. It seems like as it's coming through the atmosphere, as they go through thicker and thicker atmosphere, it really starts emulating the thing to death and burning it up worse and worse. More and more of these meteors that we catch, not on a potato camera, and watch them come in the atmosphere in these streaks that they have found through all kinds of cameras and so on, that you see them come in, you can see them start to light up and then they brighten real bright and then burn up. And that's the thing I saw whenever I was a kid, whenever we would go outside and we found out there was a meteor storm coming at certain times of the year. One was right near Christmas that I talk about, and that hooks up to ancient tales with death and so on. But then also it hooks up sometimes to closer things, and something like this that we might be able to relate to. Although we still have the Day of the Dead for Halloween. Got a separate video on that. I'll try to stay on this topic right here. Where we are is we're in New Zealand. And what this goes off of is that they found that there was a crater or a tsunami effect that had happened on Jervis Bay. And inland from Jervis Bay in Australia, it's way up here, and where it had come from. And of course what they're trying to do is triangulate the idea of where something came from, and it looked like they had a continental shift or something that had happened out here. Perhaps one of these volcanic islands or something like that goes on. More research was done, and then the idea that came about on it, and then people finding in Tasmania, streaking in a few other places, that there had actually been an event that had happened somewhere in this area. And so let's look at some of this knowledge that leads kind of further into showing you the reality of what happened here in New Zealand. We're going to go down to what's known as Stewart Island, and it's here right off the tip of it, as you can see. In Stewart Island, as you see here, has some beaches and stuff that's around it. You can even see them easily from a satellite photograph, where they have some beaches around them in certain areas, and pardon me, finger of God. So down here and around through here and so on. What's odd about these a little bit, and luckily this was all on a pretty clear day, a little bit of cloudiness here and there, but other than that we're pretty open, is the fact that that beach seems to come inland real harshly right there, a little bit down there too, right? So if we come in further on this, it starts to come into focus a little bit better. You can see these little islands that were off here in this bay that they have here. And this is Mason's Bay. We get a little closer here, you can see it. Hopefully it shows up well. It looks like it does on the camera. Where parts of this beach that's out here have been taken and run inland 1.5 miles. Now I did a recent video. Well, it's not that recent, probably whenever I put this out. I try not to put these out all at one time. Sometimes I'll put something out like this and I'll do it 1, 2, 3 and show you a series of things, but then I feel like I'm pushing on it too much, and sometimes, oh, all you're about is craters and stuff, and it's like, no, that's just showing you something else. What this shows is a catastrophism, things that had happened to the planet that causes catastrophes, or catastrophes that had happened. Some of these involve people being here on the planet. Some of these involve before it even happens. A lot of these events that cause all kinds of different environmental changes and things like that were done well before humans had any impact on the planet. So when we figure in that to a modern conception of what we're doing on the planet and the way people are freaking out, sometimes it's a little bit egregious, but let's not go there in this video. So I showed not too long ago, if I remember, in the Levant area, right there around Anatolia, and there was a bay that looked very much like this, and they had shown where water had rushed inland from an ancient catastrophe that happened and killed off all these people, and it was many thousands of years ago, though, right? And so ancient tales got me, mythologies and stuff came from that and so on, and we discussed that. I've glimpsed but not shown the whole ideal of Burkle Crater and what its concepts are. I found another guy's video series on it. It's about 4 months old now, but I tried to record a part of what the guy had said, and it got flagged just sitting in my... I uploaded it and it flagged because it's a professional type of production that they've done here with it, and of course that flags. So I'll have to redo that. That comes to mind as I'm showing you this, but let's go one step closer here on this and take a look at it just a little bit better. If I was to keep that from screwing up and pull this down a little bit more. Now, of course, there was that area that we were looking at before that was below this that has the same effect on it. But what makes this unique somewhat, that you don't really make out and discern unless you were down on the ground at these points, like where my pointer is here, is that this goes up to hundreds of feet above sea level. I think it shows up good enough up here, but around in here you can see things curving and going and humping over and humping over, humping over, running through, humping over and going down. And this is sand. It's all out here that got pushed inland 1.5 miles or more. I mean, you see it's still carried on to here and so on, and I'm sure there are remnants that lead out past this point. In fact, if we were to just go a little bit to the right of this, there's that waterlet here, and I don't know if it has salt in it or anything that's there, but also the whole ground that's here. I know that it's that Google map thing where there's a few weird pictures and this one's just showing clouds. I mean, what's that all about? Well, we tried to take it on a cloudy day, or they're covering something up in some way, huh? But then we see all of this that leads on, and there's patches of sand that lead in here and right in here, and that's You know, looking at the scale that's down here, if the scale is saying 2,000 foot is very small, there's a 2,000, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, these are miles inland, these patches of sand that come here. And some people would say, well, that's probably from being washed in or the storms or so on, but it's not from that effect at all. It's actually from a tsunami that happened in this area or offshore here, some 18 to 20 miles, a little bit northeast of here, kind of right over there. And there's a ripple in the sand and a dent in the bay, but it's also deep enough in water, and if this thing was coming in at an angle to go to hit it and hit the water, it would explode out. And so they found this crater. Now, get this idea. It's about 12 miles wide. Now, to put that in perspective, you know the crater that's in Arizona that most all of us know when we think about a crater. A lot of times our mind goes right there onto the moon. That Arizona crater is right at a mile. So it's 12 times the size of it. Now, this is not saying that the thing that hit there is 12 times the size of the thing that hit that, because there's a whole concept of kinetic energy and how it punches through and angles of interaction, whether it hits from an angle like this or a far angle, or if just above the top of the water here, it blew up and created a dent that's much wider than it would create. You know, it's going to create this huge crater out here, but it was only the size of the end of my finger. But when it blew up, it goes blah, and then that creates a whole crater that's 12 miles wide. So pretty dramatic here. In fact, it's going over these mountains, and I don't know if it shows up real well, but you see those little green spots that are in that? And that effect in between here and here. On this paper we're going to look at, they discuss that and how that's just 6 meters higher than the area that's around it. And so they tried to discern and say that that's how high the wave was. I disagree totally, though. I think this wave, which is what they also say in the paper, so it kind of contradicts itself just a little bit in a concept, or the way they worded it there, to make you think that that's how high the water was, but it was much higher than that. In fact, at the bottom of it, whenever it came in, it picked up all of this here, and it shoved over the land way past into here. And in doing so, it left that, and whenever it streamed back out, some of the water straining back out as it would, of course, it left this here, and the sand ended up scouring back to where it left a little bit exposed, and there's some greenery that's growing there that's not this beach. Surely it's a little odd to find a beach that's running for 1.5 miles inland, and then whenever you looked at it, it's grown in fingers, and if I was to turn this on its side, it would look like a fire. Well, the strange thing about that is this is named after the New Zealand or Maori god of fire. Yeah. And so let's take a look at this back just a little bit more. And you can see this crater that's there. And as we go back here, somewhere offshore here is where it happened. And I don't know why they've got this invisible blotch that's right there, and also there's a dent with an invisible blotch there, which sounds like that might have something to do with it too. But if it happened right there, this would block most of the Australian effect that they've seen from it. And so what it really looks like is that it's this thing right here. And if you look at it, even though it's got a jumbled bottom to it, it's about the size of that island in the first place that we're looking at. And so whenever it popped it there, created a tidal wave which grabbed all the stuff on this continental shelf here that runs up quite a few hundred feet from the bottom and shoved it up over all of this. And I'm sure there's probably remnants of it all kinds of places, but one place that we could see, it'll show you something, is that beach sand. Another effect I just mentioned here real quick, you see the lighter area that's here? During the last ice age, all that area was above ground, so this island would have been connected, in fact more like a mountain on it. And when we go down here, we can see that it connected all the way to this mountain here, which is an island now, and islands, and this stretching down and so on. And if we were to zoom out, that of course leads to Antarctica eventually. But you can also see how much land there used to be in that continental moo idea that people talk about. It's all underwater, and now all we have is the higher land or the higher places available to us. So you saw that sand that's there. Now let's go to a paper, a PDF that's on this. And in doing so, we can look at some more of this information, but they'll show you the pictures, but they're just kind of black and white, not quite as good as what we just looked at. So this is named after the Maori god of fire. This is Mahuika crater. The event is the Mahuika event. And you can see how mythologies perhaps came out of this for those people, for they have some ancient stories about this and this tidal wave that goes on. And it wasn't long ago. The Maori really haven't been on the island for that long. In fact, it also shows the end of the idea of these emu type cassowaries and these giant birds that used to live there. You know, sometimes I'll show you video clips from either a Dungeon Dragon game that I play on or that Ark Survival where you've got all the dinosaurs and all those things, and one dinosaur we have on there, it's called a terror bird, and that's what it is that thing right before, and the bigger version even, of this giant ostrich that's an eagle ostrich with a beak and claws, and it really actually comes from raptors, and it's got a raptor claw in it. These cassowaries had claws like this too, where they can really rip something open and mess you up. It's not to be messed with. But they lived on and died off conspicuously within a decade or so of this event. About 500 years ago, a cosmogenic tsunami produced a minimum run-up of 130 meters in Jervis Bay near Sydney, Australia. 130 meters high water. You think of that in comparison to the tsunamis that we know about Banda Aceh and the later one in Japan and so on. So, but that's in Australia. How tall was it here? Well, the probable source crater for this event is Mahuika crater at 48 degrees south, 166.4 degrees east on the western edge of New Zealand shelf. Mahuika's impact crater is 20 kilometers in diameter and less than 1,000 years old. It has a tektite field that is found in surface sediments located to the southeast of the crater. Tektites are prima facie evidence of impact origin. These are the things that it's the fingerprint of it. Although Jervis Bay is over 1,500 kilometers from Mahuika Crater, Stewart Island is only about 200 kilometers northeast of Mahuika Crater. Consequently, the tsunami run-ups from Mahuika impact should be higher on Stewart Island than in Jervis Bay. We are conducting a field survey in February 2004 to determine if the maximum elevations of the sand lobes represent tsunami run-up or wind-blown deposition. We'll have our results at the meeting. Well, they had their meeting, and this isn't wind-blown in any way. And there's sediments and crustacean creatures and stuff that are associated with this that have led them believe that, nah, that's not it. So here's an aerial photo, and this is exactly what we were looking at. This is the area that we were exactly looking at with the extra sand that's inland here in black and white. In preparation for our field program, we have obtained orthoponic aerial photograph coverage of the field area, and the aerial photographs show many sand lobes that roughly run west to east but meander along the strike. At some locations, the sand lobes show an appearance that resembles a braided stream. Overall, very little of the sand lobe surface resemble wind-blown dunes. Well, also in the wind-blown dunes, whenever you go into their full presentation on it, it's an hour and a half long or more reading the whole thing. They talk about how dunes have a ripple, and the normal wind that they have from there would cause a rippling that's across it in a certain direction, and there's none of that. There is a little down on the beach here, but there's really none of that here because they're trapped in the valleys, and it doesn't work that way, and so it just leads them to the idea that it didn't come from there at all. So that's the aerial photograph of the area that we're looking at within 4 to 8 kilometers of the west coast of Stewart Island between Mason Bay and Hellfire Beach. Getting a lot of these Hellfire names. See, because the white areas of the beach left are the sand lobes right, and the photo is oriented so that the up direction is due north. So, same thing we were looking at before. And if we look at it here, that's what we were looking at also. Detail of the southernmost sand lobe in Figure 1. The sand lobe is widest on its western left edge, narrows as it moves towards the east, and the sand lobe bifurcates around the top of the Big Sand Hill in the right center. And the top of Big Sand Hill is 156 meters above sea level. The sand lobe climbs up to 150 meters above sea level, and the sand lobe continues to go east down into the marshland behind the Big Sand Hill at its easternmost extent. The sand lobe is over 4.2 kilometers from the ocean. Note that the sand lobe has very few obvious north-south oriented highs, as it would be expected in the case of sand blown by the prevailing westerly winds. So it kind of looks like a dolphin sticking out here with a porpoise in its little mouth and stuff, but you can see how it's been pushed and gone around. It's more of a sediment that over time things have grown back in on somewhat. But I bet you get core samples and it'd be a whole lot more definitive here. And again, we saw stuff all the way out here where my finger is, where there's a dot up here and one down here of this sand that's coming in from here. There's another picture of the one that's more southerly. I believe that whenever we looked at the whole map and there was that one that was down there that I said something about in the first, this is it. Detail of sand lobes show that the clearest resemblance to braided streams. The sand lobes extend to the at least 60 meters above sea level and 1 kilometer away from the coast, and this one here. So they talk about the spatial distribution of chemical difference of tektites and so on to go along with it. And this is just a part of the paper that's shown here, but correlating data with the pictures that are here. And again, they find those tektites and stuff that goes along with it, right? So again, we have an idea of something that happened not too long ago. Well, what other connections do we have to it? Well, strangely, one connection that we have to this is that the supposedly the people that archaeologically went and checked this all out have found remnants of boats that are up in the second set of mountains that are here, that are hundreds of feet above sea level in those mountains, in a Noah type situation. And they thought it was the remnants of 2 boats, because the parts that they find, you know, each boat has one of these, and there's 2 of them, and they both appear to be upside down, crumpled, and there's just a little bit left of them, but also they've been burnt. And they got radiocarbon dates off of this, and it actually showed that this happened in 1444 to 1448. And that correlates with a lot of other data that they had going on here. And there's a strange tale the Japanese have of having 100 ships that they sent out, and they were going to different places. And during that time, one of the places, of course, here coming out the South China Sea and around through the islands down through, would have been New Zealand, and this place that was here. Strangely, they sent out over 100 ships, and then the stories turned into 1,000, by the way, over time. And it may not have even ever been 100 ships. It may have been just a bunch. It may have been 60. It may have been 45. But the profession is 1,000, right? And so they were on these ships that were out here whenever this happened. And out of the 100 ships, if it was 100, only a few ever made it back to their original destination. The other ones were all lost. And there's been a lot of conjecture about where they got lost, or if they got lost in the, storms, or who knows what happened off of it. But then one of the tales that comes from that is that they were lost in this big O thing that seemed way a big fish story, right? But in actuality, it seems like it may not have been so much of a fish story. One thing I found in this tailing of it, and what shows you that this thing was probably a cometary fragment rather than a meteor, is that they saw it beforehand and it was on fire. Now that'll lead you both ways too, because right when a meteor comes in, you see it on fire and then it's burning up, whoa, and then this thing that happens. And if they would have been around these islands here and saw it happen 20 miles out or more and made that crater we looked at, would have taken a second for it to got there, but they would have seen that fire streak that goes across, right? Also, the tale was that it set everything on fire, and it just doesn't make any sense until you find out something like this much later. And though it doesn't really correlate with the reality of this either, it makes a lot more sense when you figure out this was where that tale came from. So I just thought I'd show you this one more situation here. We're going to get into looking at Burkle Crater too, because that thing that the information that the guy showed, it's kind of interesting, and it shows a different aspect to the idea of the flood of the Sumerians and what happened to the ancient people of India. Like, share, and subscribe, and enjoy. Peace.